Hola, ¿cómo estás? Bienvenido o bienvenida a esta clase. Hello and welcome to today's class. Today, I want to talk to you about the tricky word le in Spanish. So what is le? Well, le is what we call an indirect object pronoun. When you see IOP, that just means indirect object pronoun. A DOP would be an direct object pronoun. Now, what's the difference between a direct object pronoun and an indirect object pronoun? Well, that's what I'm going to teach you today. So we have two kinds of object pronouns, direct and indirect. These are our pronouns for the direct object pronouns. So we have me, te, lo, la, nos, los, and las. And for our IOPs, almost the same, except for two key differences. Me, te, le, nos, and les. Now, what is le representing? Well, technically, le is representing the él, ella, and usted form. Okay? So technically, le can represent all of those. Can represent él, can represent ella, can represent usted. Which is why le can be quite tricky, because if I were to say something to you like, ya le dije, and I apologize for my bad handwriting, ya le dije, you do not know who le is in this case unless I have given you prior context. Now that's important to note. In Spanish, if you want to use object pronouns, then you need to have prior context. Because if I were to, once again, say something to you like, lo compré, for example, sorry for my bad handwriting, you would not know what lo represents. You'd be like, well, what does lo mean? Lo could be, I don't know, the bag or the dog or the chicken. I don't know. We don't know. So, in order to use object pronouns, we need to have prior context. Now, the whole reason that we even use object pronouns is simply because I don't want to have to say big, long words in all of my sentences. So, let's say I'm talking about the refrigerator, right? El refrigerador. I don't want to have to keep saying that. I don't want to say, compré el refrigerador. Y el refrigerador, blah, blah, blah. It's a mouthful. So I can turn that word, el refrigerador, into an object pronoun. So in that case, let's say I was talking about the refrigerator and then I said to you, lo compré, well, you would understand that I'm talking about the refrigerator. Now, lo, in this case, would translate to it. Okay, I bought it. Okay, same thing with la, for example, would be the same thing. So let's say I was talking about una botella, a bottle. Well, now, la botella would become just la, so I could say something like la compré, I bought it. Now, when it comes to le, here is the really, really key thing to remember. Le and les are almost always for people. Okay, that's really important to understand. Uh-oh, technical difficulties. There you go. Okay, le and les are almost always for people. That's very, very important to understand. So I'll highlight that for you. Okay, so when you hear something like le or les, just think, okay, this is going to be for people. Now, if you hear something like lo, la, los, or las, then almost always it's going to be for an inanimate object. So something like the book or the hat, so on and so forth. Whereas le and les are almost always going to represent people. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be that. Okay, now an exception here would be with a phrase like lo quiero, for example. Okay, let me move this down for you. So in this example, la quiero, here this could go one of two ways. La quiero could mean I want it. That's one option. Or this could also mean, and this is going to maybe throw you for a loop here, I love her. What the heck? That's two very different things, Nate. What's going on here? Well, here, the reason that we can use la to represent her is because in a simple sentence like la quiero, we only have one object. Therefore, that object is being directly affected by our verb, which in this case would be quiero. So, la quiero could be I want it. So let's say, once again, I was talking about something like la botella, the bottle. And I tell you, hey, la quiero. I want it, and I'm referring to the bottle. But let's say I was talking about my novia, my girlfriend, for example, and then I said to you, la quiero mucho. I love her a lot. Now, we're using la. Let me erase my thing there. We're using la because she is the only object in the sentence. However, most times in Spanish, we have longer sentences that are more complex, which is why I tell you the key thing to remember here is that le and les are almost always for people. That's very important to understand. Okay, so le and les almost always for people. Lo, la, los, and las are almost always for objects. But there we have that little exception. Okay, now let's take a look at some examples here. I'm going to erase this so that we can see better. So let's take a look at some examples. We have mi amigo nos trajo la pizza. Okay, let me select this really quick. So mi amigo nos trajo la pizza. Okay, in this sentence, we're saying my friend brought us the pizza. Okay, nos in this case is what we call the indirect object. Okay, this is very important to understand. This is the indirect object pronoun, whereas pizza or la pizza is our direct object. Okay, why? Well, because trajo, our verb, meaning brought, is directly affecting la pizza, which is why la pizza is the direct object of the sentence. And who happens to be getting indirectly affected by this? Nos. Okay, so trajo is our verb. La pizza is our direct object pronoun because it, once again, is being directly affected by that verb, trajo. And then we, nos, are being indirectly affected by. Okay? So let me get rid of all this crazy writing. So now we have mi amigo nos trajo la pizza. Sorry, it's hard to switch back between all these things. One moment. Technical difficulties. I'm still learning this new setup, so it's a bit tricky to kind of do it all at the same time, okay? So for example, mi amigo nos trajo la pizza. Now, we can shorten this even more and we can combine our object pronouns. So we have our IOP first, and then we have our DOP. So in Spanish, when you are speaking, the indirect object pronoun is always going to go before the direct object pronoun. That's very important to remember. Okay, so the indirect object pronoun always comes before the direct object pronoun. Another important thing to remember is that our object pronouns are always going to go before the first conjugated verb in our sentence. So trajo is a conjugated verb coming from the infinitive verb traer, meaning to bring. And so we are going to put our object pronouns before this verb trajo. Okay? So, mi amigo nos la trajo. So in this first example, we have my friend brought us the pizza. Whereas in the second example, we have my friend brought us it. Okay, so notice how we're just shortening up our sentences. That is why we use object pronouns. Okay, so let's move on to number 3. Ella le dio el regalo. So she gave him the gift. Now, once again, what's up with le? Because remember, le can represent él, ella, or usted. Okay, remember that le and les are almost always for people. So, ella le dio el regalo. Le could represent him, her. It could even represent usted, which means you, and it's formal. Okay, so something that we'll occasionally do in Spanish is we will attach on some extra context to our sentences. So I could say, ella le dio el regalo, or I could say something like, ella le dio el regalo a él, or I could say something like a Juan, for example, for even more context. So she gave him the gift. A él lets us know that we're talking about him. Or we're talking about Juan, let's say, to make it even more specific. So ella gave him the gift. Who did she give it to? To Juan. Now, this is optional. You do not need to do this. However, if you've been talking about a bunch of different people, sometimes this helps a lot, and it gives us that extra context. Okay? Now, here I am going to throw you for a loop. Now, we have our direct object pronoun, lo, in this example, and here we have our indirect object pronoun, which is now se. So what the heck is going on? We have turned el regalo, or I'll put that in red so you don't get confused. We have turned el regalo into lo in this example. However, le has become se. Why? Well, because in Spanish, what I like to say is you cannot have Lilo and Stitch. So you cannot say something like lelo or leslo or lelos, so on and so forth. You cannot do it. No, 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 no. Do not do that. Okay? That's why we're going to have celo. So I could say something like celo. I could say cela. I could say celos, for example. Now, this gets confusing because se is now representing not only le, but it also can represent les. So this is quite tricky. So now le and les can be represented by se. Oh my gosh, I know it's a lot of information, so no worry if it's tricky. Take your time, okay? So, in this case, ella se lo dio, okay? Now, in this case, now el regalo has become lo. We've shortened it up to just mean it. And now le has become se because we cannot have Lilo and Stitch in Spanish. And now we have ella se lo dio. She gave him it, or she gave it to him, okay? Now, another thing that goes on in Spanish, and I'm going to erase this so that we can more easily see this, is that we will have the attachment of object pronouns to the end of things like progressive verbs, for example. There are different examples like commands or infinitives, but here we have the example of progressive verbs. Okay, so está comprándola. Now, in this case, I don't know who is doing the buying of this. This could be ella está, right? So ella está or él está, for example. We don't know, but we're just going to say él está comprando la, for example. Okay, so él está comprando la. La representing it. Let's say la leche, for example. We were talking about milk earlier, and I say, where's Juan? He's comprando la, or la leche. Okay, so la representing la leche. Now, you might be wondering, Nate, I think I've heard it as well, where people will put the la before the verb está in this case. So it would be la está comprando, and you would be correct. So in Spanish, you can do two things. You can attach the object pronoun to the end, like we did here, está comprando la. And I find that us as English speakers like to do this. Or you could say, hey, you know what? I'm actually going to put it before our first conjugated verb. So now we would have la está comprando. Remember, like we talked about earlier, when it comes to the placement of object pronouns, the indirect object pronoun comes first, and then the direct object pronoun comes second. Okay, so la está comprando. Okay, so the golden rule here is that this is our first conjugated verb, está, and therefore we can put our object pronoun right before that first conjugated verb. Okay, now what if I was to say something like she is buying it for her? How would we do that? Well, now we have, once again, the combination, like we saw here, we have the combination of object pronouns. So here, we would say something like this. We have two options. We can do our first one, which would be, let me go back here. Technical difficulties. Okay, hold on. Just got to pull this up. Okay, so we have está. Here we go. What's going on? I'm having issues here. Technical difficulties. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, back. Okay, so we have two options. We have, oh my goodness. Okay, we have está. It's because my hand is touching the screen, I think. Come on. Okay. Okay, well, my thing is getting confused and it's not letting me write. Okay. Está comprando. So we have two options. Está comprando se la. Okay, comprándosela. Okay. Or we have se la está comprando. And forgive me for these technical difficulties. Still learning this setup. Okay, so we have two options. We can do se la está comprando or está comprándose la. Both work. Now, remember, the golden rule is that the object pronouns can always go before the first conjugated verb. So in that case, this would be dio. Okay, so there we go. All right, we're almost done. Now, what about something like me da or me das? You may have heard this before. Well, this is used when we order food in Mexico. And when we say something like me da or me das, this is actually just an even more polite way to command someone to do something. So, I've skipped this command. So in this first example, dámelo, that is a standard command. Give it to me. So me representing me and lo representing it, whatever it may be. Maybe it's el control remoto, the remote control. Okay, so dámelo. Okay, now in Mexico, like I said, if you want to command someone to do something in an even more polite way, you could say me da or me das. Okay, now our final example here, looking at les instead of le, we have les cuento la historia. So les representing ellos, ellas, or ustedes, and la historia being our direct object pronoun. Now, if I want to turn les into se so that I can turn la historia into just la, well, now we're going to have se la cuento. Okay, so se representing them and la representing la historia. Okay? All right, remember, le and les are almost always for people. Lo, la, los, and las are almost always for inanimate objects. I know this was a lot of information, so I hope you've learned something new. Please leave me a comment down below if you're confused or you struggle with this. I hope I didn't overwhelm you too much. Muchas gracias por ver este video. If you'd like to learn more Spanish from me, click the link in the video description to check out our Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy. Our goal is to help you have a 10-minute Spanish conversation in 90 days without feeling unconfident. So check it out by clicking the link in the video description or by going to SpanishWithNate.com. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.